I sat quietly on the couch, staring blankly at the clock. The seconds ticked by, but each one felt like an eternity. My thoughts spiraled into a chaotic whirlpool as I replayed the events of the past year over and over in my mind. It had been 12 months since Kevin and I tied the knot, 12 months of trying to make things work, 12 months of enduring his cold indifference. And yet, here I was, stuck in this suffocating cycle of silence and fear, unable to break free. When we first got married, I believed Kevin was my second chance at happiness. My father had warned me to tread carefully. "You've been through enough," he said, referring to the heartache I endured with a man who turned out to be a gold digger. I thought Kevin was different. He seemed kind, understanding, and genuine. But that facade didn't last long. A few weeks into our marriage, Kevin began to change. He was no longer the charming man who brought me flowers or whispered sweet nothings into my ear. Instead, he became someone I barely recognized. His complaints about my cooking started small, a subtle jab about how dinner lacked variety or how the soup was too salty. But over time, his words grew sharper and his criticisms more relentless. Nothing I did seemed to please him. "Cheese omelets again?" he scoffed one night. "Can't you think of something else? This is so childish." "But Kevin," I said softly, "you used to love cheese omelets." "I've been making them for years." "Don't argue with me," he snapped. "You're my wife. You should know better by now." I swallowed my frustration, forcing a smile. Deep down, I told myself he was just stressed from work, that this wasn't who he truly was. But as the months passed, his controlling behavior only worsened. He dictated how I folded laundry, criticized how I cleaned the house, and even monitored the exact time I came home from work. Any deviation from his expectations was met with anger. 6 months into our marriage, I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home. Kevin's temper flared over the smallest things. If dinner wasn't ready on time, he'd yell. If I spoke back, even in the mildest tone, he'd shout louder. One evening, he threw the meal I'd prepared into the trash and stormed out of the kitchen. I felt my chest tighten as I held back tears, unsure of how much more I could endure. I thought about confiding in my father, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. He had been so proud of me for finding someone after my last heartbreak. I didn't want to disappoint him or confirm his earlier fears. So I kept silent, convincing myself that I could fix things on my own. But Kevin's cruelty didn't just stop at harsh words. One night, after I came home late from work due to unexpected overtime, he was furious. "What time do you call this?" he demanded as I stepped through the door. "I'm sorry, Kevin. I had to finish some accounting tasks. It won't happen again," I said, trying to pacify him. "It's unthinkable for a woman to come home later than her husband," he snapped. "If you're late again, I'll make you quit your job." The threat hung heavy in the air. I wanted to fight back, to tell him how unfair he was being, but fear held me back. Instead, I nodded and promised to be home earlier next time. By the time our 1-year anniversary approached, I was a shell of the person I once was. My appetite had diminished, and my days felt like an endless cycle of misery. I knew I had to do something, anything, to change my situation. That's when my father called me into his office for a private conversation. "Rose," he said warmly, "it's been a year since your wedding. As promised, I think it's time you told Kevin the truth about your background." I froze. The truth. My father's wealth and influence had always been a part of my life, but I'd kept it hidden from Kevin. It was his idea, after all. He believed that revealing too much too soon might attract someone who wasn't truly genuine. I'd agreed, wanting to ensure that Kevin loved me for who I was, not for my family's money. But now, the thought of sharing that truth with Kevin terrified me. "Is something wrong?" my father asked, noticing my hesitation. "No, it's nothing," I lied. "I just need a little more time." He smiled and patted my shoulder. "Take all the time you need, sweetheart. But remember, honesty is the foundation of any strong relationship." That night, I decided to confront Kevin about his behavior. I wanted us to find a way to move forward, to rebuild the connection we once had. But when I tried to talk to him, things took a dark turn. "Kevin," I began cautiously, I think we need to have an honest conversation. I want us to work together to make our relationship better. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. Better? What do you mean? I think things are just fine. They're not fine, I said, my voice trembling. You've changed, Kevin. You're not the man I married. You're cold, controlling, and cruel. Before I could say more, he stood up abruptly, towering over me. You think you can talk to me like that? He hissed. Don't forget your place, Rose. I'm the one who married you. I gave you a home, a life. You should be grateful. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to reason with him. I loved you, Kevin. I still want to believe that the man I fell in love with is still in there somewhere. He laughed bitterly. Love? Don't be so naive. I married you because you were easy to control. You're nothing more than a convenient housekeeper. His words cut through me like a blade. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to let him see me break. That night, I made a silent vow to myself. I would no longer be his victim. I needed to find a way out. The next morning, I woke up feeling feverish and weak. My body ached, and I struggled to get out of bed. When Kevin noticed I hadn't prepared breakfast, he stormed into the bedroom. What's the matter with you? He barked. I have a fever, I stammered. I think it's 105 degrees. I just need to rest. Rest? He sneered. You're unbelievable. A little fever and you're already useless. Get up and do your job. I begged him to understand, but he slammed the door and left for work without another word. Alone in the house, I realized how far I'd let things spiral. My mind raced as I tried to think of a solution. Then, unexpectedly, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see Mr. Powell, Kevin's boss. He smiled politely, holding a folder in his hand. Good evening, Mrs. Sanders, he said. I hope I'm not intruding. Hearing my maiden name caught me off guard. Oh, no, not at all. Please, come in. As we sat in the living room, Mr. Powell's expression grew serious. I apologize if this seems forward, but I've noticed some concerning things about Kevin recently. And when I realized you're President Sanders' daughter, I thought I should speak with you directly. My heart raced. What do you mean? He hesitated before continuing. Kevin, he's been treating you poorly, hasn't he? I've seen glimpses of it during office gatherings. It's not right. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The weight of my struggles threatened to overwhelm me, but Mr. Powell's genuine concern gave me the courage to open up. Yes, I admitted quietly. He's changed so much. I don't know what to do anymore. Mr. Powell placed a reassuring hand on mine. You don't have to face this alone, Rose. I'll help you. That conversation was the turning point. With Mr. Powell's support, I found the strength to confront my fears. A few days later, my father summoned me to his office, and when I arrived, I was shocked to see Kevin sitting there, pale and visibly shaken. Rose, my father said sternly, I've heard everything. It's time to put an end to this. Kevin tried to plead his case, but my father cut him off. You've humiliated my daughter and treated her like a servant. You have no place in her life anymore. In that moment, I felt a surge of relief. For the first time in months, I could see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. The divorce process began shortly after, and with the support of my family and Mr. Powell, I started to rebuild my life. Kevin's attempts to apologize were futile. I no longer had room in my heart for his empty promises. The chapter with him was closed, and I was ready to start anew. And though the scars of the past lingered, they reminded me of my strength and resilience. I was free to live, free to hope,